And we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Allie Wyatt. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Female Founder Collective and the 10th House, which is our private membership community, as well as the North, which is our expert advisory platform. And I'm super excited to be here today with Sara Wilson, somebody who basically everybody in the industry has always told me about as just this soothsayer, as well as somebody that knows everything about digital marketing and content and media. And really going back to the soothsayer comment, really can see the future. But before we get into it with her and tap into her incredible brain and wealth of knowledge, I wanted to remind everybody that we have our winter cohort session that is currently live as far as applications go. It'll be starting in mid-January. So definitely come and sign up. And again, that is our private membership community where you can come and find resources. You can connect with other founders by stage, industry, geography. You get to be part of Ask Me Anythings with people like Sara and other incredible leaders, as well as to download templates that will be really helpful for your business. So we hope you can join us for that because applications will close at the end of December. But I wanted to also just really quickly, other housekeeping things. We have 2 events coming up. There's a lot happening for us at Female Founder Collective in December. We have our holiday sip and shop in New York City. So if you're New York City based, this is a great opportunity to get together with your fellow founders, to learn. We're actually going to have people stationed to talk about how to effectively merchandise as well as do social media marketing for your business to sort of stand out from the clutter during the holiday season. And we also have a virtual event led by our very own Rebecca Minkoff, and she's going to be interviewing and speaking with Lili Sadugi, Kylie Taryn Nakeo, and Taryn Thomas, and Divya Mathur, who is actually head of buying for Intermix on December 7th. So definitely join us there. And then finally, our other event happening in Los Angeles next week is on December 9th, next Friday. And it's going to be all about money, how to raise it, how to find it, how to build it, how to cultivate it. So without further ado, I'm now excited to introduce you to Sara and sort of talk about her incredible background before we get into a myriad of questions. Sara is a journalist turned social marketer who works with brands, publications, and platforms like YouTube, Nike, Bumble, the New York Times, and others. And she works with them to find, engage, and grow obsessive communities across digital channels through her consultancy, SW Projects. Sara also writes frequently on the subject of digital marketing trends. She coined the term digital campfires in the Harvard Business Review to describe the types of spaces where young audiences are gathering online today, and often speaks and leads workshops on this and other topics related to social innovation, Web3, Gen Z consumption trends to companies around the world such as Microsoft and McKinsey. And most recently, she served as the interim director of marketing at tokenized entertainment platform Rove, and that's roveworld.xyz. And prior to founding SW Projects, she ran lifestyle partnerships at Facebook and Instagram and was editor at the Huffington Post and Los Angeles Magazine and wrote for several leading publications, including The Economist, People Magazine, and The Independent. So your career has brought you to so many different places and let you see sort of so many different aspects of engaging with a community, with an audience, as well as with a consumer. But as mentioned in your bio, you are really a journalist turned social media marketer who works with brands, publications, platforms like YouTube, Nike, Bumble. How has this trajectory in your mind affected your holistic approach to how you think about brand, content, and community strategy?
Yeah, totally. Well, first off, thank you so much for having me. This is I love talking to incredible communities of especially women entrepreneurs. So this is my jam. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me. So Yeah, I mean, essentially the way I think about everything is audience first. And so that is essentially how a journalist, how an editor might think about shaping a story. I come from a content background, as you said, and, in sort of relaying my bio. And at first, I sort of just, that was second nature to me to think about, all right, who's the audience we're going after? How do we shape content around them? And it really was sort of in my DNA as a journalist. That evolved so that I was able to bring that to brands. And so when I left Facebook in 2018, where I was running lifestyle partnerships, I saw this opportunity to really bring the same level of, understanding of how audiences operate online, how content is consumed online to brands, because I saw brands kind of, I would say, having and leading conversations that only publishers used to lead. Like if you think about brands leading conversations about social issues or there's a moral compass now that brands have to weigh in on that and those conversations. That was really ramping up at that time. So I said, okay, I can really bring my content background to this. And honestly, in the 5 years that have passed since, it has only escalated. I've seen this crazy rise in it's not a nice to have. Content isn't a nice to have on your strategy as a brand. You really have to be thinking about that from the get-go. So it really has become central.
And I totally agree with this, by the way. And it's a very challenging thing for people that don't come from that background, right? And it is very sort of natural for, I think, content creators that sort of started off in that space. You then have to sort of learn these different channels and how different audiences react to different things. But I do love the fact that you sort of mention it as, like you say, an audience rather than just consumers, because basically everyone is a content creator today.
Yes.
And I'd love to dive into how you approach each new client as well. How do you help them think about platform mix? Speaking of that, right? There's so many different ones to think about and potentially get distracted by, and the amount of time they spend in each and how they invest in each platform too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, today I actually posted about something that's like an ailment that I believe exists, but nobody talks about, called DPIS, Digital Platform Imposter Syndrome. Now, I totally made it up. So if you've never heard of it, that's totally fine. But I believe that we all have it to some degree, even the best marketers, even the best brand leaders, the ones at the top of their field on panels, whatever. Not everyone can know everything. There are just so many new platforms, so many new features on existing platforms. So to me, it's less about completely understanding every single one of those. Of course, you have to have a working knowledge, but it's more about, okay, who is my audience? So it's always that question that I'm asking with brands: who is your specific audience? Who do you really want to reach? And then where do they hang out? Are they on TikTok? They may not be consuming primarily on that platform, and that's not necessarily going to be your primary. I definitely think TikTok is a huge lever that a lot of brands can use to pull, and we could talk about that. But I don't think it's like oh my goodness, I need to be everywhere. It's really, especially now in this era of there's so much distributed content. Where's your audience? Where are they showing up? Where are they consuming? And then how can you really reach them there? And then how can you think about a combination of what I call billboard channels? So those are your kind of channels that advertise to as many people as possible and bring your people in. So finding your people. And then digital campfire channels. So those are your smaller, more intimate spaces where you're stoking, intimate, more private conversations for your core community. So it really is about balancing those two, but it all starts with audience. And a lot of brands, surprisingly, don't have a handle on that in the way that you would expect.
And as far as channels like TikTok, like you mentioned, some might argue that, oh, I have to be there because that's, one of the highest consumption channels in the world right now. So to some degree, your audience is going to be there. How much does sort of consumer behavior also and sort of the behavior intent behind that channel come into play when you're thinking about advising on that mix?
Consumer intent. What do you mean exactly?
So meaning why are they going to that channel? Sure, they might be there, right? But if you're selling, business advice, is that the best place to go versus, being on LinkedIn?
Okay, so if you're selling business advice, yes, TikTok is an amazing channel. So I would think about it like this. when I'm thinking about TikTok. Do you have a super boring business, something that isn't fun, isn't sexy? Oh my goodness, go to TikTok. There are so many examples on that platform of businesses that are incredibly dull on the surface that have made leaps and bounds and strides in sort of developing a community. I remember one that I used to reference all the time was like a lawnmower company out of Ohio, probably like a year ago. They were killing it on TikTok because they really just cracked this nut of content that was really compelling. It totally lent itself to short form video and it spoke the language of the platform. So I think it's less about, is my audience there, than can I think of a really interesting way to storytell around my content, whether it's boring or not. And I actually think boring businesses, quote unquote boring, have the advantage here in some ways. Like, think about one of the biggest breakout stars of the pandemic on TikTok was Miss Excel. She's a spreadsheet creator. She's an Excel expert. Like, what? That's crazy. She's built a whole business around that. So when you think about
The
this,
breakout star of the pandemic,
I mean, it's true. Like, I mean, maybe it's because we're all on our phones, but no, I mean, she's made a whole business. She has products now. I mean, it's really wild. So this is not something we could have ever imagined, right? So that's a really great platform for thinking about that. And I do think it's much more than just Gen Z on TikTok. So if you're not there as a brand now, you kind of do have to question, all right, you have to have a real clear reason why.
Right.
So yes, it is a massive platform for sure.
And as a Gen Z demystifier, speaking of Gen Z,
yeah,
and former Meta team member, you were an expert in a wide range, obviously, of social media platforms. What consumption trends do you expect in the next 3 to 5 years, as based off of what you've seen?
Yeah, totally. Well, I will speak to those, but first off, just to the question of Gen Z demystifier, like, I am not personally Gen Z. I rely on my incredible roster of friends and extended network to really help me understand. So I pull in and have like sessions with Gen Zers because I understand that, I'm not necessarily in the trenches every single day, but they are. You know what I mean? So I think first and foremost, having your people around you who can really feed into that really helps with social listening and really understanding these platforms. In terms of what am I thinking for the next 3 to 5 years? Well, I mentioned digital campfires before. So as you mentioned up top, I've written about this at length. I essentially started writing about this, essentially a framework that I rolled out in 2020 to describe a trend, a shift that I had been seeing away from kind of open social platforms, open social networks, towards more private, more closed, more intimate social spaces, let's call it. And I wrote that piece in 2020. And I think when I wrote it, I sort of thought, okay, here are the 3 types of digital campfires. I broke them all down, and you can share it with the audience of this afterwards. And you can read up on that and go into detail. But I think I thought about it like a trend on some level. Like, okay, this is a consumption trend. I think 2.5, almost 3 years later, it's way bigger than that. Like, I actually think it's a new organizing principle of the internet. Like, not to overblow it, but like, I have just seen the rise of community, the rise of community-led businesses, the explosion of platforms like Discord and gaming platforms like Roblox and Fortnite, and the rise of sort of text message as a space where content is being produced and distributed. Like, all of these are examples of digital campfire platforms. So when I think of, okay, like maybe this is way bigger than I thought it was. So that is, I would say that's kind of a big macro trend of, for the next 3 to 5 years for sure. But I actually think it's going to be a lot longer than that. I mean, we can speak to as many or as little trends as you want. I have so many.
Well, I'm interested to on the digital campfire trend.
Yeah.
For so long, it's been about reach, right? Marketing. It's always been about how big of numbers can I get?
Yeah.
And obviously, digital campfire is about intimacy. It's the opposite.
Yeah.
So I'm also curious, how are marketers thinking about, or how should marketers be thinking about, and founders be thinking about for their specific businesses, that campfire experience? Like, why is that potentially important? To utilize, and how might they utilize it to drive revenue?
Yeah. So I think it's a combination of those sort of two, let's call them two polar nodes, like the digital campfire being that intimate space, and then the let's call it social channels being your billboard spaces, and how those two things interact. I actually love a framework that was shared to me by Glossier's community team a few years ago, but I actually think it still stands, and it's really referred to as the lowercase c community framework, essentially lowercase c community and uppercase C community. So you have this kind of like on one side, and I can share this out after because I've written about it on LinkedIn, a capital C community. That's your core crew, your evangelists, your people who love you, your people who, have bought your products. If you have a product, will rep for you, will show up for you. The more that you can show them brand love, you can show them love and reward them and show them, that you see them, help them feel seen, help them feel valued and give them value. The more that's going to stoke your lowercase c community. And your lowercase c community is anyone who's maybe ever opened an email of yours, anyone who's ever lightweight interacted with your content, but not somebody who's like really showing up for you. So to me, actually, the two feed each other in a quite direct way. And now I think the pendulum has swung away from just capture as many eyeballs as possible, all the way back to, all right, what's the most intimate experience we can have? And how can that then feed and drive awareness, brand love, and growth? Honestly, at the end of the day, it is about growth. It's just a different way of getting there.
So let's talk about community, because obviously you know a tremendous amount about this. And I love the uppercase C and the lowercase c. And we don't use that exact framework, but that's how we think about our community as well. But nowadays, communities are absolutely crucial to a company's trajectory, obviously. How do you utilize, once you've built this community, right? How do you continue to monetize the experience that's in a way that's authentic and mutually beneficial?
Yeah, it's a tough question. It's one that I get a lot. I don't know that there is a one size fits all because everyone is different, but I will say there are a few consistent, common denominators. The first is, how are you thinking about constantly delivering value? And I'll put it like this, because I think people think of value in the form of like a monetary sense, like what are you giving them? And it's not always about that. It can literally be as small as a thank you note, a handwritten card. Like, how are you constantly making them feel seen and helping them, and then go back to that, making them feel valued? So is that value enough to translate into something that they would pay for? So I'm always somebody who would advise on keep the community free at first and then monetize different aspects of it. That said, if you have a hyper valuable offering, something that like is super niche and very like results in people being able to up level their lives in some way or make a lot of money, like that's super valuable. You might be able to monetize that directly from the start. So I would never say to you, don't do it off the bat, because it's a totally viable depending on the niche you're in. But for a lot, it is going to be about drumming up, showing and showing and showing the value over and over again, so that in a year's time, someone will be able to be like, wow, I've gotten so much of that out of that community. I've made connections. I've gotten my next business, whatever it is. And I feel really good about giving them either my money or my time. So thinking about like, what are those different forms of value you're constantly delivering to them? And honestly, that's going to depend based on who your audience is, because everyone has a different conception of what value means to everybody.
So going back to, the value proposition, right? You've worked with a lot of community leaders. You're one yourself. Going back to sort of the uppercase C and lowercase c, you said that they're mutually beneficial. They sort of grow each other, but especially the uppercase C community grows that lowercase c community. What are some patterns that you've maybe seen, or tactical things that you've come across with these community leading brands that have been these great learnings over time that you could maybe share with founders as a way to sort of think about their own communities?
Yeah, for sure. So I actually have another framework, and I'm just pulling it up here because I sometimes forget exactly.
Love a framework.
It's the 5 C's. Okay. We love a 5C. Okay. I'll just walk you through it in the
My
way.
kid's school has 5 C's.
Oh, good. Okay. I like to talk about it because it really is a framework for going. It's like a checklist. Like, okay, what do I see the best communities doing again and again and again? What do I see the best digital campfire platforms doing it again and again? And so I'll walk you through them. The first is caring for MVPs. Remember I mentioned thank you notes? Like, in the early days of a company, you might not have digital badges or rewards to give people. It might be as simple as a handwritten thank you note. That's still caring for MVPs. Like, I interviewed someone on my series that I had called the Digital Campfire Download. And I think I put this in the wrap up, which I can share as well with your community. That's what he did at the beginning of launching his platform. I believe it was Network, which is a live shopping platform. And he didn't have much more, but he wrote thank you notes. And like that went such a long way to stoking, brand love from that core capital C community. The next one is collaboration. So giving your community opportunities to collaborate both with each other and with you. So not just, hey, complete this survey, tell us what you think, but like, what are some ways we actually actively collaborate to build this community and build the products we're delivering together? Creative customization. So this can be, it doesn't apply to everything, but customizing your avatar, customizing your the way you show up in that community, customizing your boxes, it is the expectation now that you're going to be able to customize within an inch of its life. So thinking about ways you can actively do that is really smart. Content moderation. I can't stress this enough. So if you have a community where content is, where you're connecting, et cetera, is really important to have moderation, someone or an entity empowered to enforce rules, because it just can go off the rails really, really quickly. And it's important. If people feel safe, and if they're actually asking them to reveal intimate details of their lives, like in the case of, like, for example, the modern fertility community or Dr. Becky's incredible community. If you've any parents here might be in that. So yeah, it's great, right? And there's great moderation. And then the last one is consistency. So consistency obviously matters for everything we do, any type of goal you want to hit, but consistency is really important. I often see brands go like, well, we want to build a community. It's like a very much a one and done. And it doesn't really work that way. It might work for like a quick hit, a quick PR hit, but it's not going to build long-term community.
So I want to transition over to talking about your personal brand and how, in that sort of relationship to your overall business brand, how you build that specific community and how you can leverage that towards business goals, right?
Yeah.
Can you speak to, as founders think of themselves as sort of marketing engines in and of themselves, or they think about their personal brand, any advice or things that you have seen work successfully, even for founders who are like, I'm an operator, I'm not necessarily wanting to be forward facing?
Yeah. So I think I always go back to the term building in public. I don't know if your viewers are like familiar with that term, but it came up on Twitter. I've heard it, maybe it's an engineering term, but it's really about showing your work, showing what you're building, letting people in on the process. That is such a part of how companies are built today. And the companies that I see doing that, the founders and, CEOs that I see doing that, are really getting ahead. And that's not only putting yourself out there in one way. I think it has to work for you. So it could, yes, use social, but don't assume you have to like launch a TikTok channel if you're not comfortable with that. Think about Twitter. I mean, Twitter is a little bit of a hellscape right now, but like TBD on that. We think about the channel is what I mean, and think about, all right, where am I most comfortable, and what can I share from this process? And I think the key is just sharing and being transparent and open about how you're doing it. And the companies that I see doing that, and they're often Gen Z led companies, because it's second nature to them, with founders who get it are winning. And I love what I see and it's truly empowering, I think, for other up and coming entrepreneurs to see, oh my gosh, I can do that. And they're learning, I'm learning. So the idea of learning while you go, I think is super relatable and helps people connect to your product. So I think of it as an asset, a massive asset. And it's not to be ignored. The other day I did see something on TikTok that was really memorable. It was a woman who had created this like CPR, sort of like kit thing for children. Like, talk about unsexy, talk about not like a beauty product. Okay. And she is out there on TikTok repping for her product, but just talking and telling stories about story times. What was this like getting this, in front of medical device buyers, how she turned down her first funding round because she just wanted to like do it herself, really getting out there. And I watched like a bunch of her videos. Like, I knew nothing about her, but I wanted to root for her. I wanted to buy her product. I definitely clicked on her product. I have a daughter. Like, I would have told, let's do it. So I think it really gives a humanity behind the brand. And for brands that don't have that, I think, still need to think about ways to really lean into humanity, especially on TikTok.
And we've talked about budgets in the past, Sarah, just in terms of how do you think about marketing budgets and how to budget for all of this content creation? Because, I come from a media background. You're obviously from a media and platform background. What are some ways that founders can do this without it being such an expense for them and their business and their time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like their time is expensive.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
how might founders think about marketing in a way that's a little bit scrappier and content creation that's a little bit scrappier?
I mean, I wish I could say there's a magic bullet, but for the folks who are comfortable being in front of a camera, like, that's going to be your quickest way to grow without spending money. So if you can leverage yourself, yes, you have to spend time, but if you can, let's say, get a quick tutorial, do some reading, immerse yourself, spend time on the platform you think your audience is on, so you can learn that language. And then, okay, I think I have a working knowledge. Use yourself, not as some kind of a shiller, but somebody who can actually help people understand like what you're about, what the product's about. I think that's probably the lowest lift, quickest way to build audience, because ultimately it's about building audience. It's not necessarily anymore about selling product immediately. And I think you kind of have to think of it that way. That said, like, for sure, Gen Z is very comfortable getting sold to. It just has to be done in the right way. And I think that's the key. It's not about like never sell. It's not at all. Brands are showing up on these platforms, and the ones who are doing really well are crushing it. They're doing great, but it's more about, okay, let's storytell.
Value too. Yeah.
Value and story and speaking the language. I keep coming back to language because I think it's important.
Yeah. And this is sort of what we're talking about, but I know that you said on LinkedIn before, if you show up in any capacity online, you're inherently a marketer. And that means in one way or another, virtually everyone is a marketer. And I know that, and we sort of going back to the beginning, we talked about there's so many different platforms and there's so many different ways to reach a consumer. What do you think are the top skills, just soft skills even, of a marketer that founders can really work on to help drive their business forward?
Absolutely. I mean, I said this on that post that I wrote, which I'm happy to share with this audience. Like, I think that everyone's a marketer now, because if you show up online in any capacity whatsoever, you are a marketer. So like, period, full stop. I think I used to have a reaction to that word, like, oh, I'm being sold to, but it's like, no. Embrace it, understand it, and understand the new skills. So when we talk about what are those skills, I actually think they're very similar, and maybe I'm fully biased, but I think they're very similar to the skills that one needs as a journalist. So it's things like embedding in spaces that feel foreign to understand the languages being spoken there, learning how to listen as much for like what's not being said as for what's being said. A real deep comfort with experimentation and play. So being willing to experiment, being willing to just have fun, and think of being honestly like a kid. Constantly chasing curiosity to see where it leads, asking questions, asking more questions, and then also being radically comfortable with uncertainty. Because I think what I'm seeing right now in this moment is everybody is grasping at straws to tell you what's happening. We are in a massive liminal space right now, meaning we are in the middle of kind of, we don't know what's coming. We don't really know where we came from. It's like we're in this in between. And I don't know, I feel it. I don't know if you feel it, Allie, but I know that I've had multiple conversations where marketers feel it, brand leaders feel
A new normal and reality is being created as we
speak. And we're creating it. So I resist when people are like, this is what it's like. This is the answer. It's like, no. Nobody knows. Just it's all about experimentation, creativity, and play. So like, what a fun time.
Yeah.
You know?
It is. Because you can create what the next version of reality and sort of go-to processes look like.
Yeah, those skills, like when people are like, what do you need now to be a marketer? People are like, okay, well, SEO, this and that. I'm like, okay, that's all good, kind of, but this is the stuff that, because even SEO is changing. I mean, SEO skills that you needed to know, just as one small example, a year ago, completely different. I'm not saying none of that applies, but now TikTok is a huge source of SEO traffic, right? Like people are using it.
It seems like one of the key skills you need is being nimble, right? Like you need to be willing to be flexible. You need to be ever curious as well, so that you can immerse yourself and sort of put yourself in the mind of the consumer and their behavior and what they might want and more so need.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes. I have yet another framework I love called the GAF, Give a Fuck framework. Yep. And it's all about putting your consumer first and you basically putting yourself in their shoes and sort of looking at everything you do through the eyes of what is the emotionally driven outcome for them. So it's like, you want to sell product, they want to feel seen. How do you get those two things together? Oh, cool. It's giving them XYZ thing and helping them feel valued. So it's just always thinking about everything you do through that lens.
I love that. And the final thing I want to discuss to wrap up is how people can work with you to revamp their brand, content, community strategies. And also to note, Sara is going to be joining us on the North as one of our incredible advisors. So you'll be able to book one-on-one sessions with her as well there. But how else can they work with you, Sara?
Yeah, so I would say what I do breaks out into 3 different areas. So the first is something I call digital campfire coaching, which I recently rolled out, kind of like a new tier of coaching services that's specifically designed for smaller companies and startups. And I'll work with you to advise on how to think about building your personal brand, your personal community with a really specific 3-step process that I've developed and that I speak on. I also do speaking and workshops. I spoke at Emerson Collective about a week or 2 ago, which is a fabulous nonprofit. And I do a lot of speaking for companies around the world. I think you mentioned that up top. So if you're interested in having me come in, I love to speak, if you can't tell. And I do a lot of it. And then lastly, I do a lot of client one-on-one work where I'll work directly with clients of all stripes, brands and publishers primarily, to really develop bespoke brand content and community strategies. And as part of that, I often do workshops in-house as well. So all of the above.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, we're so grateful to have you here. Everyone, make sure to go and follow Sara, because she also posts just such incredible content that is really helpful with her frameworks, which is always just so helpful to have something to refer back to and to put into action. And then, of course, we have our 10th house cohort that will be closing in about a month and launching in January for orientation. So join us there. Thank you so much, Sara. Really appreciate it.
Here. Thank you so much for having me. And anyone who's in this, please just reach out, ask questions. I love to connect. I've been getting way more excited about LinkedIn these days. There's a lot of action happening on here. So feel free to reach out.
Love it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.